Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Centralized IAM Governance Using CloudFormation StackSets and AWS Organizations. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. On the right side of your screen, you will see a Q&A window. Please use this to submit your questions for our presenter and moderators at any time, and we'll address them while they come in. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be several poll questions during Q&A. Please take a quick minute to provide us with your feedback when you see these poll questions appear on your screen. We are recording today's session, and in the next few days, we'll send you a follow-up email with links to the presentation deck and webinar recording. Again, welcome to today's webinar, Centralized IAM Governance Using CloudFormation StackSets and AWS Organizations. Our presenters today are Luis Colon and David Schonbrun. David, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Schonbrun, and I'm with AWS Professional Services. Today, we're going to be talking about how to use AWS Organizations and AWS StackSets to centrally manage IAM controls at scale. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of both services and two of the greatest challenges that our customers face that we're trying to solve by using them together. We're going to discuss some user stories and provide you with links to useful information. To start out, for those of you who are not aware, AWS Organizations was announced last year at reInvent in 2016 and made generally available in early 2017. It provides customers the ability to create and manage AWS accounts in an automated fashion and group them as an enterprise. CloudFormation StackSets, which was launched in the middle of 2017, enhances the power of organizations by automating distribution and management of resources as stacks to a defined group of accounts. The webinar today reviews how these services work together to simplify account creation, automating deployment, and change management for IAM standards, but this also applies to other areas. We'll talk more about that as we go through the webinar. The first challenge we're addressing with this solution is to provide central control of various different stacks at scale. Customers often tell us that IAM policy replication across accounts is manual, and in order for them to simplify it, requires a lot of custom scripting. They've also told us that account creation was overly manual, and billing consolidation, again, required too many steps. We created AWS Organizations to solve these problems. We provide control across accounts of the AWS services at the API level. We've automated account creation, and we've provided simple consolidated billing and usage reporting. Here are some of the key concepts of AWS Organizations. First of all, we have an OU, an organizational unit, which is a group of accounts. The root OU at the top level, which includes all accounts in the organization, is fundamental and is created automatically. The master account is the top account in the organization and is used mainly for management purposes. Groups of accounts, called OUs, are created to segregate different types of accounts and apply service control policies to them. Here's a sample reference architecture for a large enterprise. You can see that this is a life sciences company that's chosen to segregate and group some of its resources that have HIPAA data or HIPAA applications. They've also looked at geography. A particular country might have its own regulatory requirements, and different environment types, prod for business critical, non-business critical, dev, test, and sandbox. Organizations gives you the ability to create blacklists and whitelists in an SCP format and apply them to these groups of accounts in OUs. Now I'll hand it off to Luis to talk about AWS CloudFormation StackSets.
All right, thanks, David. My name is Luis, and I'm going to be talking about the StackSets half of what we were talking about before with David. Basically, StackSets is a feature from CloudFormation that was released in the summer of 2017 to allow an automated way to deploy resources, applications, and stacks across multiple accounts and regions. So the problem that we're trying to solve is automating provisioning. And there's several reasons why you may want to split your applications into multiple accounts and regions. The account reasons, for example, are that different types of users may not, it may not be appropriate for them to have access to certain resources. So a way to employ those limitations is to add different user groups to different account groups, and of course extending to different organization units. So some of those accounts may need to be restricted or isolated. From a perspective of availability, you may have a couple of reasons why you may want to use multiple regions. For example, if it's strictly for splitting traffic, you can do availability zones, but using regions that are specifically and geographically dispersed places in the world might give you that extra scalability benefit, or in some cases, it might help you comply with regulations where data cannot exit a particular geography of the world. So the usage of StackSets is very applicable for small, medium, and large customers. Here's a couple of examples. In column 1, we see an example of an existing customer that has already thousands of accounts, and now they need to grow to around 10,000 accounts. Not only that, but they want to expand their region footprint as AWS makes more regions available. And they have a variety of types of resources that they need to implement, including networking, virtual machines with EC2, and security controls. The same thing can happen with different clients that perhaps don't have that many accounts, but perhaps have the flexibility or the necessity to use many different types of resources, like using CloudTrail and config for monitoring. In all these cases, the functionality of automating the deployment across multiple accounts and regions is very useful. Before we had released StackSets in the summer of 2017, companies were having to do this out of necessity, but they had to either have manual operations, which sometimes can significantly deter them from releasing at a very large, very fast clip. And of course, every time there's a manual operation, there's a possibility of human error. In some other cases, some companies created their own homegrown scripts and programs, but of course this adds maintenance, and now that's another set of code that you need to audit, and you need to make sure that it's properly working as changes happen over time. And yet there's other cases where other providers provide some shrink wrap tools, if you will, for doing this, but of course that's an additional investment that some companies may not be in a position to exercise. So we brought forth the idea of StackSets. Now, if you are a CloudFormation user, you may be familiar with some of the key elements of CloudFormation. Resources are the kinds of things that you can create, update, and delete, and it includes everything from the traditional EC2 to serverless application resources and transforms. Templates are our infrastructure as code file that uses a declarative language to specify what resources to create in what regions. And then stacks is, once that template gets deployed into CloudFormation, it becomes a stack. A traditional way to looking at stacks is looking at something like a LAMP stack application, where you have a multi-tier web application with all networking components included. A better metaphor is the stack just represents groups of resources that you manage together. So you may manage together security and policies and rules. You may manage together networking components. You may manage together stateful resources like databases, and so on and so forth. In the same way that it only takes one operation to deploy a series of resources in a template into a stack, StackSets extends that single operation functionality, but now being able to put stack instances across accounts and regions. So here are some 4 core concepts that have to do specifically with StackSets. Much like before with stacks and templates, the stack set starts with a single global template, carefully designed to be as much region and account agnostic as possible. If you, for example, set up that stack set to go into multiple accounts and multiple regions, we use the same benefits that CloudFormation has in terms of making sure that those stacks are properly deployed, they stabilize, there's a way for us to roll them back, and there's a way for us to cleanly delete them. We have two types of accounts that are involved in StackSets. One is an administrator account, and the remainder are the target accounts. The idea here is that the administrator account is the one that you will use to implement and deploy the StackSets. The accounts that you target are going to be the multiple accounts that you can use across regions. As we bring organizations into this idea, rather than having to list dozens of accounts, for example, you can specify an organizational unit, and all the accounts within that organizational unit will serve as your target accounts. So in a way, it will be a target organizational unit. In terms of like the number of instances that you ultimately are going to end up deploying, you take the number of accounts and the number of regions, and the Cartesian product of that turns into the number of instances that are active and maintained by the CloudFormation StackSets functionality. So in this case, 3 regions, 3 accounts, the Cartesian product is 9 stack instances. There are many use cases beyond the organizational and the security compliance use cases that we've alluded to in this webinar. For example, you can set up new accounts with defaults where CloudTrail is enabled for all regions. Everybody's using an administration S3 bucket to make sure that policies have a central place or configurations have a central place to live in. You can set up config rules and properly tag resources, which becomes very useful when you turn around and have to troubleshoot problems and dig through log files and other monitoring components. Setting up KMS keys. Ensure that the infrastructure that you're deploying is identical. Make sure that that stack across region 1 and region 2 from the perspective of AWS deployment looks exactly the same configuration-wise. And also use CloudFormation to speed up the deployment of a new region if you need to duplicate another region for a variety of reasons. Business continuity and disaster recovery are 2 critical processes that are even more critical in medium and large organizations. You can set up bucket replication with StackSets very quickly across regions, and you can provision read replicas for RDS databases as well. And this is just a sampling. David will cover a couple more use cases that are more specific, tailored towards security and governance. In terms of operations, not unlike what we do with single stacks, we have create, update, and delete stacks. And when you create a stack set and you specify the accounts and the regions, it will not only deploy the stack set, but it will monitor as those stack sets are created. The same idea of changing the template to in a declarative way to indicate how a configuration will change also applies here in the update stack set operation. When it comes to delete, you have a couple of different options. You can actually keep the stack set in place, but delete individual stacks from individual regions. And then only after the stack set is no longer used because there's a dramatically changed new version, then you can delete the stack set. But you don't have to delete the stack set. You can delete underlying stacks and create new stacks without having to delete the stack set. There's some new options also with these operations. For example, today CloudFormation does provide some smart parallelism that CloudFormation will attempt to create resources that do not depend on each other at the same time. Something analogous to that can be done here. You'll be able to say, I need to deploy 50 or 60 stack instances. I'm going to allow for 2 or 3 of them to happen at the same time. There's criteria by which you may not want to allow that, or you may want to allow it just because your number of target instances is really large. You can also tell CloudFormation to say, start deploying stacks and only fail if a certain number of stacks have failed. If 1 failure out of 50 is something that you can tolerate, you can let CloudFormation deploy the other 49 stacks. You can also, after you delete the stack sets, much like you can do with stacks, you can retain those stacks. So let me show you a quick demo as to how this looks. I'm going to switch over to a browser, and I'm going to show you a typical CloudFormation management console where I have normal stacks for various components. I'm going to switch to a new view that shows me my stack sets. As I switch to that view, I notice here that I don't have anything on the list. I'm going to quickly create a stack set. By default, you can do some of the same options that you can do with individual stacks, like specify a template URL that you already have stored. And this is the kind of place where you would store your stack code or your template code coming out of, for example, code commit or a GitHub repo. You can upload a template manually. And in the stack set case, you can pick from a quick template. I'm going to use one of those to speed up the demo here. And I'm going to click next. This particular sample, what it's going to do, it's going to automatically enable AWS config in a certain number of accounts and regions. I'm going to call my stack set SS demo. That actually sounds like a boat denomination, the SS demo. All right. For now, I'll leave most of these parameters the same. I'm going to want to deliver snapshots for this particular sample every 3 hours. You can also choose to add an email or add an SNS topic if you want to get notifications. When we click next, we can list a whole bunch of accounts here, or we can list AWS organizational units. So for the purposes of this demo, I created an organization where I have a main account and 3 accounts under that. And I can see my organizational tree where I have my root, I have my red organizational unit with 1 account, and I have my green organizational unit with 2 accounts. I'm going to select the green organizational unit, and I'm going to be particularly mindful here of the organizational unit's ID. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, switch screens, and now with a single organizational unit, if, for example, I had 5 or 50 accounts, this one operation is going to deploy stacks in 50 accounts multiplied by the number of regions that I select. So as you saw in the organization, I only have 2 accounts here. I'm going to select 2 regions in Europe. So the Cartesian product is 2 times 2 equals 4. And I'm going to leave the defaults for maximum concurrent accounts and fault tolerance. I'm not going to tag anything for now. I'm going to agree to create IAM resources. And the operation begins. Here's my stack information, my description. I can look at the template that I've used, the parameters that I specified. There's my change for the frequency for AWS config in this case. No tags to speak of. And then if I refresh the screen, you should see that I have an active operation running. It has already identified my Cartesian product, and it's already working on this particular stack instance. And here they'll show outdated because they're not quite in the place that they're finalized and stabilized. But as this operation goes, you'll see how this will become, will go green. Now, if you look back at the at one of the parameters that I had where I specified that I don't want CloudFormation to do multiple ones in a row or in parallel, you can speed up when you have dozens of stack instances that you're targeting by allowing CloudFormation to do multiples in parallel. So we see that 1 completed here on EU West 1. And as we continue to refresh the screen, we see another stack definition that's very much in progress. A couple of things that I'll show you here as it deploys the remaining ones. Once this is active and these are current, and we click Manage Stack Set, that's where I can go and update an existing stack set, which again, once I update my template and update my stack set, it updates all 4 stack instances in this particular case. And also, if I choose to delete a stack or a stack set, I can do those operations separately. Delete a couple of the instances, add another region, or delete the whole thing and the stack set as well. Those operations are separate from each other so that you can reuse the stack set if that's applicable. We're halfway done. We got 2 out of the 4 stack instances completed, and now they show current. The third one is on its way. And it should complete in about a minute and a half or so. Obviously, the completion of the stacks also depends on the particular complexities of the template. If, for example, you have your core StackSet template having 100 sources, and that includes a variety of things like RDS or Redshift clusters, Elasticsearch, or included in their networking components, Elastic IPs, many IAM roles, and permissions. Obviously, those will take a little bit longer. So we're almost done here, and we're waiting for that last fourth stack, which already has a stack ID, meaning that it's in the process of being completed. Maybe a couple more refreshes here. Once this completes, I'll show you the managed StackSet screen as well. All right. So the single operation works across accounts, and in our case, across all the accounts in the organizational unit. It succeeded. It did the Cartesian product across these two accounts, the one ending on 37 and the one ending on 82, across all the regions that I specified, and now the status is current. If I were to do changes here, I can reuse the same stack set and add additional stacks, say on new regions. I can edit it. I can override some parameters and select the stacks, or I can still deleting the stack instances themselves. There's a difference between deleting the instances and deleting the stack set itself. And now when I go back to the stack set screen, it shows my SS demo stack set. Let's switch back to the slides. So we showed you how once you create accounts in organizations, which is actually fairly quick, you can either create brand new accounts in organizations or invite users that have existing accounts if you need to reorganize those users into different groups or organizational units. You set up your master and target accounts. You set up, in CloudFormation specifically, set up both the admin and target accounts for the StackSet operations. And then you can distribute policies in a single operation, like we showed with the sample config operation. That once again, if you consider that it can be 4, 5, 6 regions, say, and 100 accounts, those are 600 operations that before StackSets in organizations you would have to do manually. Now you can automate those 600 things to happen in one single operation. And obviously we showed the browser-based experience, but this is also can be leveraged with APIs as well. Now I'll turn it over to Dave again, and he can continue with the presentation.
Thanks for that demo, Luis. Let's talk now about our customers and some common use cases and user stories. First, we have the compliance officer from a life sciences company that wants to control services that are available to accounts, specifically the ones with HIPAA data, so that policy guidelines can be applied consistently. The way we approach this is to create an OU, group of accounts, those that have HIPAA data. We apply a service control policy to limit which APIs are available at all to any of the users. And then we leverage StackSets, also targeted at the same OU, to provide fine-grained permissions by developing, to provide finer-grained permissions by spinning up a stack that defines an IAM policy, both and also roles. Start again. Okay. Let's start with our first user story, the compliance officer at a life sciences company. The compliance officer wants to control the services that are available to accounts at the API level so that they can have policy guidelines consistently applied across a group of accounts. The way we approach this problem is to use organizations to apply a service control policy to that OU, that group of accounts. And similarly, we create a stack set that has IAM roles and policies defining API privileges, and we apply that stack set to the entire OU by targeting it in the master account. The SCP and IAM updates, as they're made, are automatically applied in real time, and the customer, therefore, has central control. The APIs that we use for these functions are listed at the bottom of the screen. Here's another common story that we hear from our customers. Development teams often need access to a limited set of accounts with the right controls appropriate to their roles and responsibilities. In order to do this, they script account creation. They automate the enrollment and billing consolidation so that their team's bill stays together. As accounts are added to an OU, they inherit the attached service control policy. As accounts are added to an OU, and then the right IAM privilege that enables the stack set to be deployed, they then inherit the IAM controls, including roles, privileges, and also identity management. This simplifies the process that was discussed in a blog post on the security blog this summer of how to automate account creation. Louis and I would like to share a few of the best practices that we've identified for using these two services together. First, we recommend that you use AWS CloudTrail to monitor the master account. We also recommend that you don't manage resources in the master account. Focus on using that for management schemes and also for financials. Please apply the privilege of least privilege. Please apply the principle of least privilege. Assign controls via organizational units, groupings of accounts. Test stack sets and controls on a single account or a small group of accounts first before applying it to your entire enterprise. We also recommend that you avoid assigning controls at the root level. Finishing up, here are a few helpful links where you can find information on the products and services that we've discussed today. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.